Have you ever stopped to think about how your phone knows it's you, or how a search engine just gets what you're asking? Well, the answer to all of that lies in a technology that's actually inspired by the most complex machine we know of, the human brain. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on artificial neural networks. We'll break down how they work and, maybe more importantly, how they learn. So let's start with a really simple question. How on earth does a fielder catch a cricket ball? I mean, think about it. In just a split second, their brain calculates the ball's trajectory, its speed, the wind, everything to make the perfect catch. That is a level of computation that would make a supercomputer sweat. So what's the secret? Well, the answer is, of course, this amazing network we all have right between our ears. The human nervous system, this massive tangled web of neurons, is nature's OG supercomputer. And it's the very blueprint for the artificial intelligence we're building today. Okay, so if we're going to build an artificial brain, it makes sense to start where nature did, right? We need to look at the fundamental building block of our own intelligence, the biological neuron. A biological neuron is basically a tiny little information processor, and it has a pretty simple three-step job. First up, you have the dendrites. Think of them like little antennas, grabbing signals from all the other neurons around them. Then, the soma. That's the cell body. It adds up all those signals. And if the total signal is strong enough, bam, it fires, sending an electrical pulse down the axon to connect with other neurons. It's just this constant, beautiful loop of receive, process, transmit. So how many of these little guys are we talking about? Well, get this. The adult human brain has around 100 billion neurons. That is more stars than there are in the entire Milky Way galaxy. And each one of those neurons connects to thousands of others, creating a network with trillions, literally trillions of connections. That massive web is where all our cognitive power comes from. So you have engineers looking at this incredibly elegant and efficient biological design. And they asked a really bold question. What if we could build an artificial one? And here is how they did it. It's a direct copy of the biological neuron. So the dendrites that receive signals, those become the inputs in the artificial version. The strength of the connection, the synapse, that's represented by something called a synaptic weight. The soma's job of processing all the signals, that's handled by a summation junction. And finally, the axon, the part that sends the signal out, that becomes the output. It's like this elegant digital echo of a biological process. But wait, how does the artificial neuron decide when to actually fire? Well, that's the job of something called the activation function. The best way to think of it is like a bouncer at a club. It looks at the total strength of all the incoming signals, and if that total hits a certain threshold, if it's strong enough, it lets the signal pass through. If it's not, nope, the gate stays closed. And that simple yes or no decision is the foundation for all the complex choices the network will eventually learn to make. You know, a single artificial neuron, on its own, isn't all that smart. It's pretty limited. But just like in our own brains, the real magic happens when we start connecting thousands or even millions of them together into a network. Now, the simplest setup you can have is a single-layer network, where your inputs are connected right to your outputs. But for more complex problems, we start adding what are called hidden layers in the middle. You can think of these hidden layers as teams of specialists. The first layer might just learn to spot simple things, like edges and colors. The next layer takes that and learns to combine them into shapes. And the layer after that combines shapes into objects, like an eye or a nose. This layering allows the network to understand really intricate patterns. And this, right here, is probably the most important concept. Every single one of those connections between neurons has a weight. A weight is just a number that represents how strong or important that connection is. Think of it like a volume knob. A high weight turns the signal's influence way up. A low weight turns it down. The entire process of learning for a neural network is just about fine-tuning these millions of tiny volume knobs to find the perfect settings for whatever task it's trying to do. So that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How does this giant web of simple calculators actually learn to do something as crazy complex as recognizing a face or translating a language? What is the secret sauce here? Well, the magic is in an algorithm called backpropagation. It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty intuitive. Imagine the network is trying to identify a cat in a photo. It takes a guess and says, dog. It then compares that guess to the right answer, cat, and realizes it made an error. Backpropagation is the process of working backward from that error, figuring out which of those connection weights were most responsible for the wrong answer, and then tweaking them just a tiny bit. It's a constant process of making small corrections, learning from every single mistake it makes. Here's a brilliant way to picture this. Imagine a blindfolded person standing on a huge, hilly landscape, and their goal is to get to the lowest point in the valley. They can't see the whole map, so what do? They just feel the ground right around them with their foot and take one small step in whichever direction slopes downward. The network is doing the exact same thing with its errors. It's just making tiny adjustments to its weights, always taking one small step in the direction of a better answer. This whole learning loop has a name. It's called an epoch. Let's walk through it. First, you have the forward pass, where the data flows all the way through the network to make a prediction. Next, you calculate the error. How wrong was that prediction? Then comes the critical backward pass, where the information about that error flows backward through the network, adjusting all those little weight knobs along the way. And then you just repeat, forward, calculate, backward, over and over and over again, thousands, even millions of times. And with every single epoch, the network gets just a little bit smarter. So let's zoom out. We've got these artificial neurons, we've stacked them into layers to spot complex patterns, and we've given them a way to learn from their mistakes. When you put all of that together and you scale it way, way up, you get a term I am sure you've heard before, deep learning. And it turns out, deep learning isn't some crazy, mysterious new idea. It's just what we call these artificial neural networks when they have lots and lots of those hidden layers we talked about. The deep part literally just refers to the depth of the layers. And it's that depth that allows the network to learn incredibly complex things and solve much, much bigger problems. So we started this journey with the simple firing of a single neuron, and we ended up at deep learning. We've basically created a technology in our own image, inspired by the very wiring inside our own skulls. And this leaves us with a pretty profound question to chew on. If we continue to build artificial minds that learn and adapt just like ours do, what are the ultimate limits of what they and we can achieve together?